Welcome to Infidelity Diaries. Explore the secrets and stories of infidelity with us. I came home a bit later than usual, trying not to make any noise. Jason was on the phone in the living room, and I froze when I heard his muted voice. I understand, Dad. Yes, I know. It's just, sometimes it's hard to balance work and everything else. He paused, then added, You're right. I should be spending more time with family. On the other end, Max, his father, replied calmly, but there was a seriousness in his voice. Jason, don't forget that one day you might lose more than you gain from your work. You need to learn to see those around you, especially her. A cold shiver ran through me, and it took me a moment to understand why. Her? Meaning me? Why did Max suddenly start talking about me with such gravity? Jason turned and noticed me. A flicker of something like confusion crossed his face before he quickly ended the call. His smile was forced. Eliza, you're home already. Early for you. Yes, work ended quickly, I replied, watching him. He looked tense, as if he were hiding something. What was the conversation with your dad about? I asked, trying to sound casual, though a feeling of unease was growing inside me. Jason frowned slightly. Oh, Dad was just saying I work a lot. He thinks I should spend more time at home. He chuckled as if trying to brush it off as a joke. Nothing important, honestly. But his words didn't satisfy me. I felt a strange emptiness, as if there was more to his response than he was willing to reveal. Do you think he's right? I asked, looking at him with a curiosity I tried to conceal. Right? He looked surprised. Well, maybe. You know, Dad can be a bit too absolute in his advice sometimes. But you're rarely home, I continued, pretending not to notice his tension. You've noticed that yourself, haven't you? He tensed slightly and quickly looked away. Eliza, not now. I'm really tired. This day drained me. I realized the conversation was over, but a feeling of unease lingered. I didn't want this, but Max's words sounded too convincing. Learn to see those around you. Why did it sound like that? It seemed Max was talking about more than just time. There was a depth in his words that made me question the mutual understanding between Jason and me. Trying to push those thoughts away, I went to the bedroom. But instead of feeling at ease, I felt doubt creeping into my mind with each step. When Jason joined me, I tried to voice my thoughts. Have you ever thought about us, Jason? About how we're living, like, I began. But he stopped me with a look, one so tired and sad that I fell silent. Eliza, let's just live as we are, all right? He looked directly at me, his voice sounding too calm. Just live, I echoed, slightly probing. Are you really happy with how things are now? His face shifted a little, but he quickly regained his composure. Eliza, there's nothing we need to change. We're fine. All this, it's just my parents' talks. Dad sometimes goes too far. You know him, he just worries. I shrugged, masking my worry, but a feeling of uncertainty remained inside. We hadn't even truly discussed what seemed important, and I wasn't sure if we even had anything left to discuss. Alone, I lay under the blanket and pressed a hand to my chest, listening to my heartbeat. Why did I still feel that cold, that strange taste of insecurity? My mind involuntarily drifted back to Max, not as Jason's father, but as a man. He was mature, confident, with a strength and wisdom that Jason lacked. A strange thought flickered in my mind for a moment. How would it feel if Max had said those words to me, not Jason? Family dinners were rare occasions, and I couldn't say I looked forward to them. Jason was held up at work again, so I arrived alone. The whole family had gathered in the spacious, bright dining room, filled with quiet conversations and familiar faces. As I looked around, my gaze met Max's. He gave a slight nod, and I noticed a subtle smile on his face. Eliza, it's good to see you, he said, approaching me. His voice was deep and steady, and he always spoke with confidence, unafraid to look directly into someone's eyes. Max, I replied, trying to suppress a faint feeling of excitement. How are you? Doing well as usual, though I'm a bit concerned about Jason. He smiled gently. I know work takes a lot out of him. I nodded, unable to hide a trace of disappointment. Yes, and he's so rarely home. Sometimes it feels like he's disappearing more and more, even when he's right here. The words slipped out before I had a chance to think them through, but Max didn't argue. He simply looked at me with an understanding gaze. After a while, as we sat around the table, the conversation gradually shifted to topics of work and new projects. Suddenly, someone brought up charity, and I mentioned in passing that I'd long wanted to participate in a project for women going through difficult situations. Max seemed genuinely interested and asked for more details. Would you really like to get involved? He asked, his voice reflecting genuine interest. Yes, it's been a dream of mine for a while. But honestly, I'm afraid I won't be able to pull it off. Things like this require experience, and I don't have any. Max leaned in slightly, as if drawing us both away from the crowd at the table. You're underestimating yourself. Seriously, I've seen how well you handle challenges. If you want, let's meet up and discuss how I might help. I've worked a bit in this area myself. His offer took me by surprise, but it felt sincere and unexpectedly comforting. I felt a little flutter of excitement. Max was usually reserved, rarely showing any special attention to anyone in our circle, and it seemed like this gesture meant more than simple assistance. All right, I said without really thinking. Let's meet up. I'd love to talk through some ideas. The next morning, we met at a small cafe tucked away from the noise of the city. Max was already waiting for me, seated by the window. He stood to greet me, and as I sat across from him, his smile seemed completely unguarded. You look great, Eliza, he said, and there was something warm and almost indescribable in his gaze. Thank you, I replied, feeling a slight flurry in my chest. This place is so cozy. Thank you for suggesting it. Our conversation shifted to the project, and Max asked what ideas I had in mind. I began to share my thoughts, feeling a bit nervous, but soon my words started flowing naturally. Max listened attentively, occasionally nodding and encouraging me. Eliza, you have a real gift, he said when I finished. Honestly, I think you really understand what these women need. That's an important quality. Many people approach these issues superficially, but you take it personally, and it shows. I hadn't expected such words. His compliment felt so genuine that I couldn't help but smile. Thank you, Max. That means a lot to me. But I'm still afraid I might make mistakes. It all feels so daunting, like I lack the confidence. Max leaned slightly closer to the table, his voice dropping almost to a whisper. Confidence comes with experience. Give yourself a chance. You'll be amazed at what you can accomplish. I looked at him, trying to understand why such ordinary words of encouragement felt so stirring. Was it sincere admiration, or just the way he communicated, as someone who was calm and understanding? In that moment, I noticed that his gaze lingered on me. Our eyes met, and silence fell for a moment. I wanted to say something to break the tension, but instead, I just looked at him, feeling almost spellbound. Max rose and extended his hand to help me up. Thank you for the meeting, he said, his voice slightly softer. I'm glad you trust me. And then something unexpected happened. Max leaned in slightly, his hand lingering in mine. The moment lasted only a second, but it was powerful enough to leave an impression. He leaned in and kissed me on the lips. The gesture was subtle, yet intensely personal, and I felt warmth spreading through my body. I'm sorry, he murmured, stepping back. There was a hint of surprise on his face, and something else I couldn't quite read. I stood, shaken, not knowing how to respond. There was something unconscious in that kiss, as if he didn't fully realize what he'd done. I felt a strange mix of shame and euphoria, as though someone had opened a door to the unknown for a brief moment. It's, it's fine. I, I have to go, I stammered, heading for the exit without looking back. Outside, I stopped, trying to pull myself together, but that moment stayed with me, like the feeling that the world had shifted ever so slightly off its usual axis. At home, I sat in silence for a long time, feeling that something had happened, something that shouldn't have. Jason announced his plan suddenly during another late-night dinner. "We're going out of town this weekend. A cabin by the lake, like back then, remember?" His voice was calm, but I caught a rare spark of enthusiasm in his eyes. "Really?" I replied, trying to hide my slight surprise. These past few months felt like a never-ending race. He was constantly absorbed in work, and I was withdrawing more and more into myself. This idea, a cabin by the lake, silence, just the two of us, seemed surprisingly simple and right. "Yeah, I think we need this. A change of scenery." He trailed off, lost in thought. I noticed a flicker of something akin to longing on his face. "Lately, it's like we've been living in parallel worlds," he added quietly. A pang of guilt stabbed at me. Everything that had happened in recent weeks gradually filled me, like icy water seeping in. I had been seeking reasons for the distance, feeling as if my thoughts were far away, not where they should be. This trip seemed like a chance to bring everything back on track, to restore the warmth, that connection that had once bonded us. We set off early on Saturday morning. The road to the lake stretched like a ribbon, flanked by autumn forests on both sides. Jason drove in silence, and that silence was thick, like water. We both seemed afraid to touch on the words that could bring us back to our old rhythm. My thoughts drifted aimlessly, and I found myself recalling my encounter with Max. "Remember the first time we came here?" Jason suddenly asked, turning onto the narrow road leading to the cabin. "You were so cold that night, and we sat by the fireplace the whole time." I smirked, trying to mask my nerves. "Yeah, and then you made your signature tea, and we couldn't get the brew right, but it was still the best tea I've ever had." Jason gave a slight smile, and for a moment it brought us back to those days when everything between us felt carefree and genuine. But the feeling quickly slipped away, and I once again felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. The cabin greeted us with familiar touches: the smell of wood, the old blanket on the sofa, the fireplace Jason quickly set alight. He poured me some wine, and we sat together, as if hoping it would help us reconnect. "Eliza," he began, looking at me as if seeing me for the first time in a long while. "Do you feel like we've drifted apart?" I averted my gaze, feeling my fingers clench around the glass. "Yes," I replied quietly. There was no point in lying. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I understood that he knew. He saw that I was distancing myself, drifting away, but he didn't know how far it had gone, and that thought made me inwardly shudder. He placed a hand on my shoulder and slowly traced his fingers along my neck, as if trying to retrieve something lost. His touch was familiar, gentle, but I felt a contradiction flare up inside me. This was my husband, the man I once loved unconditionally. Why didn't I feel that way anymore? I let myself lean closer, trying to reignite the feelings that seemed to have vanished. His arms tightened around me, and we were as close as we hadn't been in a long time, yet my mind kept drifting back to the kiss with Max. That moment, distant yet so vivid, resurfaced, leaving a shadow of guilt and a strange thrill. "Do you still feel the same?" he asked softly, interrupting my thoughts. His gaze was fixed on me, and in it I saw uncertainty, fear, doubt, all the feelings I felt myself. I didn't know what to say. Yes, I wanted to bring everything back to how it was, but inside, I no longer felt the same passion, the same closeness. All I could do was nod, trying to convince both him and myself that everything was fine. the night brought a restless sleep. I woke up several times, looking at Jason, trying to make myself feel what seemed irretrievably lost. My soul was split into two parts. One reached out to the man I had spent so many years with, and the other to those fleeting moments with Max, to the spark that I realized was forbidden. In the morning, Jason attempted to make breakfast, just like he used to when we first came here. I saw him trying, recreating everything we once had. But each of his gestures only intensified my sense of guilt. When he touched me, smiled, or joked, my mind would again drift back to that kiss, to that gaze that left a mark on me. "You seem lost in thought," he noted, sensing my absence. "Are you all right?" "Yes, of course," I replied hastily, trying to quell the rising unease. His gaze grew more cautious, and I could feel that he was seeing something beyond my words. From that moment on, our conversations grew even shorter. I understood that Jason sensed something, but like me, he was afraid to say it aloud. In the evening, we sat by the fireplace, immersed in our own thoughts, in a silence that had long since become our familiar language. Every meeting with Max filled me with a growing sense of contradiction. He was no longer just an object of attraction. He had become someone who understood me. Our work on the project quickly turned into a cover, hiding long conversations, leisurely lunches, and sometimes even walks in the park. This project had become our shared link, a reason to meet, a conversation that was more than mere professional interest. Today, we sat in a cafe on the corner, bathed in the soft light of the sun's rays. Max was flipping through my notes, while I, momentarily forgetting the project's purpose, couldn't take my eyes off him. "Have you ever felt like no one really sees you?" I asked. Maybe too directly, but it slipped out on its own. His gaze settled on mine, and he paused for a moment, as if trying to read me. "Eliza," he breathed, setting the papers aside. "You have no idea how often. Sometimes it feels like my life has always been going in the wrong direction. I've always worked, achieved, built. I reached everything that could be reached. But for what?" He gave a slight smile, but it was bitter, like a half-forgotten ghost of the past. "Maybe, like you, I can't shake the feeling that I forgot something important. Or someone." Max looked at me intently, and in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen before. "Don't you feel that it's just temporary, like it is for everyone?" I asked, as if hiding behind the words. "That it's just a phase that passes?" "No, Eliza," he said, shaking his head. "I've been living in these phases all my life. I kept waiting for something to change, for me to feel truly alive. It probably sounds foolish, but that's how it is." Inside, everything turned upside down. It was as if we were speaking not just to each other, but also to ourselves, laying out in words what was hard to admit. I couldn't hold back and asked, "Then, what keeps you in it? Why not change something now that you understand?" Max looked at me for a long time, his gaze growing softer, yet tense. "Because it's too late, Eliza. I can't change. I'm bound to this forever. I have a family, responsibilities. And you, I—" He trailed off, glancing away slightly, as if he had crossed an invisible line. "I just want to see you, to know that you're somewhere nearby." Those words sounded honest, simple. Suddenly, his words opened a part of my life that I had tried not to notice, a part where I wasn't seen, where I wasn't important. Max seemed to be saying out loud what I was afraid to admit to myself. "Max, why have we gotten so tangled? Why can't we just be honest with ourselves and others?" I blurted, unable to contain my emotions. He chuckled, watching me closely, then sighed. "Eliza, honesty isn't always what brings peace. Sometimes it only complicates things. Do you think that if we were honest, we would be here now?" He leaned closer, his gaze holding mine, as though we shared an invisible bond. "Here, with these meetings, these projects, this is the one thing I don't want to lose right now. You." I felt a spark ignite inside me. Each word he said opened something new, as if we were holding on to something forbidden, unspoken, yet real. He said he didn't want to lose me, and that thought brought not just warmth, but a strange sense of calm. We fell silent, but it was a silence filled with meaning, one that seemed to scream everything we both felt but couldn't express in words. You know, I finally said, my voice quieter than I'd intended. I haven't felt truly seen by anyone in a long time. It's strange. It's like everyone looks at me, but sees something else, not me. Max nodded sadly, mulling over my words. I understand. Very much so. He paused again, as if choosing his words carefully. You know, Eliza, you remind me of a part of myself I lost many years ago, of who I could have been, if I had chosen a different path. His words were not just an admission, they were an acknowledgement that our meetings went beyond mere chance. We had become something more to each other than just colleagues working on a project. In that moment, I realized that our encounters had become not just a coincidence, but a necessity. They filled an emptiness I couldn't explain even to myself. I knew this was more than friendship, and with every new meeting, our connection grew into something deeper, something more forbidden. This feeling thrilled me and frightened me all at once. As we were about to leave, he touched my hand, and the touch lingered longer than necessary. I felt his fingers resting against my skin, as if it were a promise, something we dared not speak of, yet both understood. Until next time? He asked, his voice sounding as if we had just sealed a secret pact that needed no words. I nodded, unable to break eye contact. As we left the cafe, I felt torn yet alive, my heart swirling with a cocktail of emotions, from happiness to deep guilt. Max suggested spending the day outside the city, and I unexpectedly agreed with ease. It was almost spontaneous, like something was pulling us both toward this encounter where we wouldn't need to pretend or hide our real feelings. He chose a small park with dense trees cloaked in autumn colors, and when we met at the entrance, I felt as if the tension of the whole week had melted away with him. We walked side by side, delving deeper into the forest, and each step seemed to draw us closer. Max began to share stories from his childhood, memories he hadn't even shared with his own children. I learned he had an older brother he had always looked up to but eventually lost, and since then, he constantly felt like he had to live up to some high standard. He spoke of how he strived to be perfect, to meet the expectations of his parents and family, and how those attempts slowly left him feeling hollow. You feel it too sometimes, don't you? He suddenly asked, stopping and looking straight into my eyes. That feeling when everything seems right, yet you know something is slipping away? I nodded, my silence speaking for me. Max, sometimes it feels like my life has turned into a series of templates. Everything has to be perfect, stable, but for some reason, I still feel lonely, even with those I love around me. Eliza, he began, his voice growing deeper. I know what you mean. You know, over these past months, I found in you a spark that I had long lost in my own life. With you, I feel like I can be my true self, not the person people are used to seeing. I paused, feeling his words sink into my mind. He stood close, his face just inches away, and in his gaze, I saw more than just a man. I saw someone who felt, who understood, who reached out to me in a way no one had before. It was as if all boundaries, all the restrictions that once held us back, had disappeared between us. I barely registered his hand touching my cheek. He leaned in, and our lips met. This wasn't an innocent kiss. There was everything in it we had been hiding, all those feelings we couldn't express in words. My body responded, as if remembering what it meant to feel desired, to feel seen. When we pulled back, silence hung between us. Max's eyes held a mix of joy and pain, and I knew he felt the same, something forbidden, yet so real. Let's not think about it, I said, as if reassuring not just him, but myself as well. Today, we can be whoever we want to be. He smiled and nodded. Eliza, if this is wrong, then why does it feel so right? Evening crept up on us unnoticed, and Max suggested dinner at a small restaurant nearby. We took a secluded table in the corner, away from others, and dove into conversations that were much more than just an exchange of words. I spoke of how I'd always felt like I was missing something, how hard it was to admit to myself that I craved not just love, but the recognition of being seen. You know, you're an incredible woman, Max said, leaning closer. You deserve to be happy, not to let anyone box you in, even if those boundaries are your own life. You deserve to be yourself, too, I replied, feeling warmth fill me with each of his looks. Sometimes I think you've lost that even more than I have. He nodded, dropping his gaze to my hands. Maybe you're right. Maybe that's what I've found with you. The night in the hotel became the culmination of all we felt. We entered the room, and even then, it felt as if there was no turning back. Max gently embraced me, his hands strong and warm, and I allowed myself to forget everything. In that moment, there was no Jason, no past, no obligations. There was only us, only this moment, which felt like the only right one. That night was something that had lingered in dreams for so long, a unity, an understanding that didn't need words. When I woke up in the morning, light seeped through the heavy curtains, illuminating us. Max was watching me, his feelings unhidden. His gaze was deep, quiet, as if he too didn't want to break this moment. What happens next? I asked, feeling a mixture of peace and anxiety settle in my heart. He shook his head slightly. I don't know, Eliza. I only know one thing. Whatever happens, I need you. His words, like this day, filled the emptiness I hadn't been able to explain for so long. Recently, Jason had become increasingly attentive toward me. His once neutral glances were now filled with an indescribable wariness. Sometimes I caught him watching as I typed a message, only for him to quickly avert his gaze. I could feel the tension building between us, a tension that was unsettling. One evening, as I sat in the kitchen, pretending to be absorbed in reading on my phone, Jason cautiously approached and sat across from me, leaning on the table. You're on your phone all the time lately, he said, trying to keep his tone as calm as possible. Really? I guess I've just been replying to work messages, I replied, feeling a twinge of anxiety rise within me. I knew my meetings with Max had gone too far, and with each new encounter, it was becoming harder to keep this secret buried. But right now, it felt as though my entire world had shrunk to the small screen of my phone. For work, Jason smirked, but his eyes remained tense. You delete work messages? My fingers instinctively tightened. I felt something shift inside me. He knew more than he was letting on, and now a crack was spreading between us. Yes, just cleaning out unnecessary stuff, I replied, hoping he couldn't sense my fear. He looked at me intently, as if trying to read my thoughts. Eliza, what's going on? Why have you suddenly become so distant? I don't understand. I averted my gaze, pretending to delve back into my phone. But the conversation left a mark that I couldn't shake off. The next day, Jason came into my bedroom and stopped at the door, holding a phone in his hand. I noticed the notification on the screen, a message from Max. In that moment, as he looked at me, I felt as though every word in the world had disappeared. Care to explain this? His voice was calm, which made it even more terrifying. He raised the phone, and I saw the notification from Max. The message was short, but revealing enough. Thanks for last night. Take care. My face went pale, and I felt my throat go dry. I couldn't immediately respond, and that silence became the clearest answer for Jason. You're seeing my father? He asked, his voice carrying not only disappointment, but a deep, raw hurt. Eliza, how long has this been going on? It felt like I'd lost the ability to speak. His gaze was heavy, piercing. Everything we had built over the years was now crumbling under the weight of secrets, and I knew that no explanation would be enough. I quietly whispered, It's not what you think. Not what I think? He raised his hand sharply, And I realized that any attempt at justification would only fuel his anger. You're hiding with my father, deleting messages, and you want to tell me it's not what I think? He stepped back, as if needing space to process what was happening. I could see the struggle within him, his fists clenched, his face tense, his eyes locked in a look of ultimate betrayal. Why, Eliza? Why my father? Was I not enough for you? His voice shook, as though he were trying to suppress all the emotions rushing out. I gathered all my strength to respond, but no words came. It seemed that any excuse would be hollow. It just happened, Jason. I can't explain. You can't explain? He let out a bitter laugh. And how long has this been going on? How long have you been lying to me? I couldn't answer. I felt the wall of estrangement between us grow insurmountable. His distrust, his anger, his pain were beyond words. I could see him struggling to understand how we had ended up here, in this moment of complete destruction. I trusted you, he said quietly, almost as if talking to himself. You were the person I wanted to spend my life with. And now, I realize I was wrong. Those words pierced me. Jason stood before me as though his heart had shattered into pieces, and I was the one who had broken it. I understood that Jason wouldn't just let this go. After he saw the message from Max, the tension between us transformed into something much darker and inevitable. He became cold and guarded, but he didn't speak openly. His silence weighed heavier than any words. On the third day after that conversation, I noticed him in the kitchen, pensively examining a small scrap of paper. As I got closer, I saw it was a piece of a note that I thought I had hidden well. It held only one sentence. I still feel it every time we're together. My heart raced, and an icy dread filled me. He looked up, meeting my gaze. In his eyes, there was everything: pain, anger, deep disappointment. It was the look of someone who suddenly realized that all the years of shared life could be shattered by a single truth. Do you want to explain this to me? His voice was so quiet it sounded almost threatening. I froze, feeling the walls around us closing in. Jason, I stammered. The words stuck in my throat, and any attempt to explain felt pointless. He abruptly tossed the note onto the table. Please, don't tell me it's not what I think. I don't want to hear any more excuses from you. I stood before him, unable to utter a word. My thoughts scattered in chaos, and I felt the situation becoming unbearable. He deserved the truth, and I knew that sooner or later I'd have to confess, even if it destroyed everything between us. Yes, it's true, I said, my voice hollow, as though I were speaking from far away. There is something between Max and me. Jason recoiled, as if my words were a physical blow. He ran his hand over his face, his breathing becoming heavier. How could you? He whispered, his eyes ablaze with a mixture of rage and despair. You were my wife. You were everything to me. And you chose my father? Jason, I can't explain it. I couldn't meet his gaze. It wasn't something planned. It just happened. I didn't even realize how it developed. But you need to know. He cut me off sharply. What do I need to know? That you don't love me anymore? That my wife fell in love with my own father? His voice broke, and the despair in it made my heart ache. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Jason, it's not because of you. You're a wonderful husband. I don't even understand how this happened myself. But my feelings, they changed. I tried to put everything back in place, but… You tried? His voice trembled. When exactly did you try? When you hid your meetings? When you lied to me? Or when you kissed him? He clenched his fists, struggling to contain his growing anger. I don't understand Eliza. What could he possibly give you that I couldn't? I fell silent, feeling empty and broken. It's not what you think. It's just, with Max, I feel seen. I don't know how to explain it any better, but he sees me in a way I haven't seen myself for a long time. With him, I feel alive. These words seemed to pierce him through. He looked at me as if he were seeing a stranger. So you just need someone else to remind you that you're alive? And I'm nothing to you? No, Jason, that's not it. I still. But I didn't finish. He silenced me with a gesture. You still what? Still love me? His voice was filled with bitterness. Don't say those words to me, not now. They mean nothing. He walked over to the window, clasping his head in his hands, as if trying to process the flood of emotions. Several minutes passed in heavy silence, broken only by his labored breathing. Finally, he turned to me. His gaze held nothing but emptiness. All I ever wanted was for you to be happy. I thought I could make you happy, that we could go through everything together. But now I don't know what to do. I took a step toward him, but he stopped me with a gesture, preventing me from coming any closer. I don't know who you are anymore, Eliza. I thought I knew you, but it seems all this time you were someone else to me. Jason, I understand this is hard. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I hoped we could change something. He gave a bitter smile, and the pain in that smile was cruel. Change? What do you want to change? You destroyed our marriage, shattered my trust, and you think we can change something? I lowered my head, realizing he was right. Our words could no longer mend what had happened. What we had was irreparably broken six.